Want to teach your kids financial literacy, but not sure where to start? Greenlight can help. With Greenlight, parents can keep an eye on kids' spending and saving, while kids and teens use a card of their own to build money confidence. As a parent, you can send instant money transfers, set up chores, automate allowance, and more. It's a convenient way to run your household, customized to your family's needs, and the easy way to raise financially smart kids. Get started with Greenlight today and get your first month free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you doing this morning?
Well, as you know, I am fleeing climate change, as it were.
Yeah.
We had rough storms come through Cleveland last week, so I am actually broadcasting from the Mahoning Valley in Youngstown, Ohio.
Wow. Okay. And today is a big day for me. It is happy birthday to me, a birthday I share.
Oh my
with,
gosh!
yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Yeah.
Not at all. So it's not just
Here,
me.
I was concentrating on all my own woes, and
well, you were probably thinking about the fact that today is actually Herbert Hoover's birthday. And that of course I understand. And when you got Herbert Hoover, Antonio Banderas, Angie Harmon, I mean, I'm right up there with the greats. Apparently, also Kylie Jenner. I had no idea, But yeah, August 10th, popular birthday for certain people, I guess. But anyway, also, before we get going, I want to say thank you to a new trial member on Patreon, Josh. Josh, we appreciate your signing up there to support us on Patreon. And I should also mention that, listeners, you've probably, maybe you've been noticing, I don't know, you've been hearing fewer ads on the show, sometimes no ads at all, especially in the middle of episodes. And of course, that's good for you. Who likes more ads? I guess there are some weird people, but for the most part, that's great, but it's not so great for us. And what's going on is that essentially corporate media podcasts have been kind of taking over the podcasting space. It's a very different world from when Jay and I started almost a decade ago. And so they've been doing what they do, sucking up listeners, sucking up revenue. And so it's been really increasingly challenging for, I guess I'll call us a scrappy independent, like the politics guys, to survive. And so what this means is that we really do need your support more than ever. So if what we do matters to you and you're in a position to help us out, we would really appreciate it. You can support us on Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, and of course, all support links are in the show notes and at politicsguys.com/support. Thanks so much. All right. So before we get going, I wanted to say that for listeners who heard last week's episode, well, you heard a lot. Things got fairly contentious between Ken and May last week, at least in the opening segment. And that led to an extended debate on our Discord about who said what, if Ken and or May were honoring the civil debate sort of ethos of the podcast and whatnot. And, Ken is our furthest left host, and May is our furthest right. And I wanted them to be together. I encouraged this kind of pairing with Trey sort of moderating so listeners could hear them debate.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
It did. And I thought, and actually, for the most part, I thought things were civil with, one or two notable exceptions. And it occurred to me in thinking about this and being part of the conversation on our Discord, I think it illustrates the difficulty of, first off, assuming good faith on the part of ideological opponents, especially those that we don't know and don't have a history with. And I think also responding in good faith and responding with restraint when you feel like you're being personally attacked. And sometimes you are. And it's really difficult, even in our little microcosm. And so it just really reminded me of how I think important it is to get out and have conversations and build relationships with people who politically you might not necessarily be ideologically in sync with, and just, but in general, I think, May and Ken recovered nicely from that rough first segment. And when the show moved on, I felt they had almost entirely civil exchanges. And Trey, I think, did a really good job of moderating. But I just wanted to put that out there. And folks, if you have any thoughts on that pairing, or if there are any other pairings of our host that you would like to hear in the future, I hope you'll let us know. All right. Well, it has been an awfully busy few weeks for Vice President Kamala Harris. I mean, one of the top items on her agenda, of course, has been deciding on a running mate, which she did this last week, making her choice of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. And prior to becoming governor, of course, Walz served 6 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. Also, he was a high school teacher, a football coach for 16 years, served in the Army National Guard for 24 years, and initially, he was thought to be kind of a long shot to be Harris's running mate, and a lot of folks felt, well, it'll be Arizona Senator Mark Kelly or Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, the most likely choices, but nope, Harris ended up choosing Walz. And, after Walz was announced, there was a Trump campaign fundraising email that claimed that Walz would, and I quote, unleash hell on earth. Jay, well, what do you think? Do you expect Tim Walz to unleash hell on earth?
Well, he wouldn't have been my first choice, but I don't know. I mean, the claim that any vice president is going to unleash hell on earth, it tends to be a bit of an overstatement, right?
You think?
But
yeah.
No, if I were, I think I can say I understand why Kamala Harris team picked him, but just as J.D. Vance would not have been my first choice, neither would Tim Walz have been my first choice.
Yeah, I think, in thinking about this, I think a lot of folks said, oh my God, what a bad choice. But, the Harris camp did more than a little bit of polling and focus group testing on all of the finalists. And it's pretty clear they came to the conclusion that something that's not shocking to really any political scientist or any close observer of American politics, that who you pick as vice president is almost certainly not going to win or lose you elections. And now I can understand saying that Josh Shapiro would have been my first choice because Pennsylvania is likely to be, a sort of a tipping point state, and maybe Shapiro wins you a few hundred votes, and maybe that's enough of a difference. But I think also you need to consider, well, if you feel like there is a good chance you're going to win whoever you pick, well, then you probably want to pick somebody who you feel good about and comfortable with. And I think, in a way, I feel like Tim Walz is more in the sort of a Dick Cheney vice presidential mode than kind of some other vice president. And what I mean by that, Jay, you'll probably get that, is, Cheney didn't have really any presidential ambitions, right? He was a team guy. He just wanted to help the Bush presidency, for better or for worse. Maybe he unleashed hell on earth, some people would say. But
yeah, Dick Cheney he might be a vice president. You could say would not unleash hell on earth.
But my point being is that it seems that Tim Walz's first question is, well, how can I help the ticket? What can I do? Whereas Josh Shapiro, from all accounts, was, well, what's my role going to be, and how can sort of I set myself up for a future presidential role? And, I can understand that from that perspective. And also, I think Walz has, he's much more of if you compare him, say, to J.D. Vance, he's much more of what I'll call a regular American, right? He's not an Ivy League grad like Vance, Yale Law, editor of Law Review. He had a regular American job, a high school teacher, a football coach, whereas Vance was this venture capitalist and, sugar daddy Peter Thiel, who helped him win his Ohio Senate race. And that's not Tim Walz at all. And so I think that's kind of a nice contrast. And like I said, between that and also being much less openly ambitious than Shapiro. Not only that, but there's that whole genocide Josh thing on the left.
Look, you're sort of overlooking the elephant in the room when we're discussing Shapiro, but go ahead.
Oh, no, what, go ahead. The elephant you're referring to?
The elephant being his name is Josh Shapiro.
Right, yeah, exactly. So I was saying the whole genocide Josh thing, right? The Israel split and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think, there were a lot of good reasons to choose Walz. I hadn't really considered some of them, but it made a lot of sense in retrospect when I gave it some thought. And I'll also point out that while Walz is being painted certainly as some crazy far left lunatic, if you take a look at his 6 terms in Congress, which I did, his voting record, the record that he compiled was on average more conservative than 81% of his fellow Democrats. And so, I mean, he's not some lunatic left, proto squad sort of person at all, but I can certainly understand why the right might want to paint him in as that way. And
well, I mean, I would say, I mean, I differ with you on, I think the reason she picked him, I mean, again, is a frequent MSNBC guest, is that the same reason I mentioned about why most vice presidents or choices are made in the modern era is to solidify the base. And I think he solidifies the base, whereas Kelly and Shapiro did not.
I think there might be some of that, but I think the base was just kind of so happy about someone other than Joe Biden being the candidate. No,
I agree. And that's what I'm saying. I sort of feel like the same way with JD Vance, like you didn't need to solidify the base. What you needed to do is to have someone that could provide some sort of outreach. And that's what I mean why I don't think he would have been my first choice, best choice. I think he is the most liberal of the potential contenders. And I think a lot of the idea that Minnesota will serve sort of as a proxy for this, middle America vote that everyone's trying to catch. I don't know that that's entirely true, at least anymore, right? I mean, I think to a lot of folks, Minnesota is sort of the San Francisco of the Midwest. And it wasn't always that way, but I think that's a sense. And so that's what I'm saying is I don't know that on the merits does that work for Tim Walz, regardless of what his voting record in Congress was. If you look at what he's done, where he's been as governor, I think he shows up as being much more far left. And again, I think it satisfies the base, but I don't know that you needed to satisfy the base because, as you said, the base was sort of thrilled that it's at least not Joe Biden. So
I think a lot of it also was kind of how he presents himself. I mean, a hunter at one point, he had an A rating from the NRA. He's, just the way he looks, he doesn't seem
he doesn't
weird,
have that rating anymore.
Right? Well, no, but I mean, he's not his line right about those guys being weird, Trump and Vance, and they are very different from regular. He looks very regular American, right? He's got that kind of regular American biography, and I think that maybe helps him.
Shucks, socialism is just another word for neighborliness and all that, right?
Well, I would disagree with you on that sort of characterization of socialism, and he's certainly not a socialist.
No, those are his words, not mine.
But in the end, I don't think it matters that much. Though the other thing I'll mention is the J.D. Vance's attacks on his military service and all that. Now, clearly, when he said about the weapons he went to war with when he was in Italy and, the war was in Afghanistan, and even his campaign came out with a statement saying, yes, he misspoke. And it was obviously a rhetorical exaggeration. And yeah, that was not okay. But this idea of this kind of stolen valor thing that, on the brink of his unit deploying to combat, he left them in the lurch and, probably caused thousands of deaths or some kind of ridiculousness. That's just this is the sort of thing that just makes me just want to vomit at campaigns. I mean, anyway. No,
I would agree with you that the Vance, the stolen valor type argument, I think is an overstatement. That said, another word for rhetorical exaggeration is lie. So you can say,
well, yes and no. Yes and no.
When I said I went to war and carried these weapons into war, the fact is he didn't, and the fact is he knows he did. Right? It's not. It wasn't a sort of slip of the tongue. That was a speech that was written out in advance, obviously. The other point I'd bring up about the military service, and again, this isn't to me. These are sort of little sideshow kind of. You know what I mean? I don't think it moves the needle one way or the other. But as you'll recall, in 1988, there was the huge furor over Dan Quayle being accused of a draft dodger because he joined the National Guard, right? So the idea that Walz leaves the National Guard just prior to deployment, and again, I think there's a fair question of whether, did he really even know that deployment was imminent or not when he made the decision to leave? But look, I think it's a fair shot. Does it move the needle a whole lot? Not really. But
I would say it would be a fair shot if actually anyone if J.D. Vance or anyone in the Trump campaign was interested in the truth of the matter. And they're clearly not, because you can say, well, what were the circumstances? And the circumstances seem to be based on the best available evidence that he was considering a run for Congress. There were, at the time he would have had to put in his retirement papers, just the vaguest rumors that his unit might possibly be deployed. It wasn't deployed until he didn't get the deployment order for his unit until 2 months after he had retired. And it was something like 10 months after that the unit actually went over. So this idea that, well, it was on the brink of, that's more than.
So, but here's the thing. I mean, nobody said that politics is fair, right? And I think that's just something that if you are a professional politician, you have to realize that there are things that you could do that, listen, are going to be used against you, fairly or unfairly.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. I'm not.
Dan Quayle may have thought he was being patriotic joining the National Guard. Same with George W. Bush.
Well, I'm not saying that. Come on. Come on.
Has made a lot of stupid statements where you have to understand that it's whatever you do or say could be misrepresented against you. And that's been politics forever and ever and ever. So my point is that, if you want to say it's not an unfair.
Well, sure, it's unfair. It's unfair. It's untruthful. And you're right. Politics is like that. But you and I are not politicians, and we can, and I think should, call out exaggerations and spin and all of that sort of thing on both sides. Wouldn't you agree?
Sure. I mean, but I still think, I don't know. Well, I mean, let's put it this way. When we consider where we came from in the first Trump campaign and the first Trump presidency, where you had one campaign hire a foreign spy to make up a story that he was a foreign spy. This seems to be, I mean, I think you could say, listen, he left his unit this time, and people can draw their own conclusions. I think that's what I'm saying is I think that's a fair argument to make.
I think it'd be a fair argument to make.
It's not as if someone's falsifying, saying that he left his unit when in fact he didn't, which was the case with George W. Bush that Dan Rather reported on national media based on fake documents. He actually left. There's no question about it. Now, if you want to question his motives, you can, and he can respond. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make in terms of the all's fair.
Absolutely. And absolutely, I would agree with that. But in the end, I think we both agree that this is sort of the storyline of the week, of the news cycle. But in the end.
This is a little side skirmish type. Yes.
Exactly. So Tim Walz, I'm sure he'll be just fine on the stump. I'm sure obviously Vice President Harris has a comfort level with him that she didn't have with the other candidates. And yeah, there you go. All right. Any other thoughts on?
Should we talk about Shapiro and the fact that there was a push to not have Shapiro be the nominee? Because I think that's significant.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Democratic Party is clearly split to a certain extent on this issue, and having a vice presidential or running mate who, clearly is maybe more in line with Israel than a number of folks in the party are, that would be problematic.
Who some would accuse of supporting genocide.
Well, there are nuts on both sides.
Sure, what I'm saying is the attack on Tim Walz saying, well, he left his unit early, that's over the line, but claiming that Josh Shapiro supports genocide is not.
Who said that?
And I get you can make the distinction of it's two different. One is, a claim being made by a candidate or a party or a campaign, where the other was just sort of outside groups or groups within the party. But I think it's not insignificant that I don't recall this type of a pressure campaign to have someone not be the vice president.
Well, I would argue that we probably wouldn't, because given how quickly the Harris campaign has had to move, everyone has had to put a lot of pressure on in ways where if you're dealing with the normal presidential campaign.
Sure. Usually you have a primary, and other people, a lot of times it's one of your former primary opponents who comes around and that sort of thing.
Yeah, these things have many, many months to kind of work themselves out. And oftentimes pressure is applied subtly over time, whereas everyone knew, oh my God, she's got to make a choice quickly. We need to push as hard as we possibly can.
Yeah. Speaking of that, did you vote in the Democratic mini primary, or when's that going to be? Is that still coming up?
It's funny to me how you people on the right are just so worked up about that. I mean,
I'm not worked up about it. I just think it's and this is something I think that's to our shame, right? If people should have listened to me months ago, partly this is why I think that I wasn't on last week or 2 weeks ago, but the Trump campaign got caught flat-footed. I think there were a lot of Republicans who naively believed that there would be some sort of process and not just coronation.
Well, there was a process, and that's the thing. This idea,
that should have been the indication of that. This is a coronation. It's Kamala. Let's get on the move.
I love how people on the right mischaracterize this, because there was a process. President Biden released his delegates. Every single top potential contender within 48 hours endorsed Vice President Harris. And so it was no more a coronation than, Donald Trump just running roughshod through the Republican primaries was.
No. But you understand the difference was with Donald Trump, there were people who challenged him in primaries, in elections, where people voted.
I see. So the problem that Republicans have is they're upset that no Democrats were going to challenge Harris. Okay.
No. The problem is just pointing out the hypocrisy. And again, I argue. I think I often point out that hypocrisy isn't always a great argument on the merits. But I think hypocrisy is a good argument to sometimes poke holes in other claims. So if you're, for example, a party who is, your platform up till, well, I think still is that, democracy is in peril, and you're not having your own voters vote. I think that says something about how great a peril you think democracy is. Basis.
I think you're saying this through your lens of dislike for the Democratic Party, and that's really biasing you here, because the simple fact of the matter is there was no way to have primaries, and even if there were, to conduct some sort of primaries, that there were no candidates running against Vice President Harris. And so this idea that it represents any sort of hypocrisy or lack of commitment to democracy is just something that the right has cooked up because they're really upset that they don't have a really easy opponent at this point. So I think this is just an entirely bogus argument.
All right.
There we go. All right. Well, let's move on and move from the vice president running mates, which not at all that important, to actually the presidential race. Because, it's hard to believe, Jay, but 3 weeks ago, things looked awfully bleak for Democrats. I mean, Donald Trump was reliably ahead in every battleground state at that point, right? But now at this point, all these leads have essentially evaporated pretty much since Harris became the Democratic nominee. And there are some people who say, well, the Trump campaign still hasn't found its footing since the switch between, Biden and Harris. Some have argued that even on the right, that Trump has kind of flailed with these sort of identity-based attacks that might work for the base, but probably not for swing voters, questioning her intelligence, claiming she's this failed border czar, DEI candidate, whatever, trying out some things, I guess. But, and I think also there's been this call on the right that, well, the media has given Harris a free pass and she hasn't held a press conference since she became the nominee. And of course, Donald Trump held his own.
Hasn't run for election, hasn't got any votes. Yes, all those things.
Yeah, and again, I understand you're coming back to that. It's like this itch you keep on, you just can't help but scratch. And anyway, but I thought we talked about that, but it's fine if you want to come back to that. But anyway,
but I mean, to the press conferences, I mean, shouldn't a presidential candidate have press conferences at some point?
Well, I think yes, absolutely. But I also think that going from 0 to 100 in the amount of time that Vice President Harris has had means that she's probably been a little bit busier than most folks. Now, if she ends up going another month without a press conference, then yeah, I'll have a real problem, I think, with that. And I think that's fair. But this first 3 weeks have just been insane. The idea of building essentially a national campaign, not entirely from scratch, but, having to put together an awful lot. I think at this point, that's an unfair criticism. Now, if it goes on for, again, like I said, another month or so, yeah, I think that's more of a fair criticism. But at this point,
how long does press conference take? Half an hour?
Okay. And if you actually think that that's how it is a candidate just gets up and says, yeah, let's have a press conference. I got a free half hour. That's not how it works at all.
Well, no, but consider, I mean, she did not, as she says, just fall out of the coconut tree. She's been vice president for 3 years.
And that matters because why?
Well, because you ought to be sort of acquainted with the issues of the day. You ought to have some sense of what your policies are.
I get it. You wanted to go out there and wing it.
And be able to talk to the press.
Oh, yeah, that would be brilliant. Just go out there and wing it. That's very Trumpian, I suppose. And maybe that's what your side is.
I don't think you would be winging it if you served as vice president for 3 years.
But that's wrong.
Theoretically, let's put it this way. If Joe Biden dropped dead tomorrow, would it be reasonable to expect her to have a press conference or to say, well, look, guys, I got a lot on my plate. Yeah, I'm president now, but this was all just dropped on me. I gotta,
very different, unfair comparison.
She's supposed to be ready to step in at a moment's notice.
Very different comparison, unfair comparison, because it's one thing to be part of the administration and as vice president being kind of your job is to carry water for that administration and to make sure you stay in line with the president's views. Right now, what the Harris campaign has been engaged in doing, again, in an incredibly dynamic, quick-moving environment, much more so than even a normal presidential campaign, is figuring out exactly how they want to present themselves. And there are some ways in which they're happy to be tied to the Biden record. In some ways, they're trying to find ways to differentiate themselves. And so it's a very, very different thing. And going into a press conference before you figured out your messaging would be a dumb move. And so I think this is a sign of strategic acumen on part of the Harris campaign.
Oh, no, obviously it's strategic. I don't disagree with you there. But I don't think, again, I don't think it's unfair to say, why isn't she having a press conference?
No, not at all. Not at all.
The answer is, well, it's strategic. I haven't figured out what I'm going to say yet. Well, okay, maybe the voters should know that and take that into consideration of someone who, for the last 3 years, has been one heartbeat away.
But again, there's a big difference between being the vice president and being your own person. You don't see the flaw in your.
I do. I mean, my sense would be, though, that whatever your positions that you are going to choose to run on as a presidential candidate probably wouldn't be all that different from what you did in the administration before.
Well, I think normally, well, not normally, I don't know if there is a normally. In some instances, I think that's true. But when you're dealing with a sitting president who is so very unpopular in so many ways, I think it becomes a little trickier, certainly.
Right. No, I understand.
If she just wants to say, well, I'm just Biden, but younger and female.
If Biden's policies had been more popular, she'd be more open to having a press conference.
I would think that makes strategic sense. Yeah. But also, I think you're ignoring the fact that she's been busier than most people in this position who are already pretty busy.
All right. Fair enough. So you're going to put on, let's put on a marker. You say one month she'll have a press conference.
I think she should have a press conference in the next month. Absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll see. So let's actually turn. I mentioned, in the open that the lead, right, that Trump had, the pretty strong lead that had led Democrats to despair, it's pretty much gone. I mean, if we take a look in those swing states right now, things are awfully close. And in fact, in those three critical states for Harris to get to 270, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, those are where she's kind of built her biggest leads, although all of those are still within the margin of error. And I'm wondering what you think about, I guess, both the movement in the polls as well as how you as Republican feel about the job that the Trump campaign has done in attacking and kind of coming out against the new candidate. Because, of course, as I pointed out, it's been an incredibly busy time for the Harris campaign, starting from nothing. It's also been a pretty busy time for the Trump campaign and Trump supporters, because even though there was a sense that maybe Biden might step down, they couldn't be sure about that. And so they're kind of starting from not exactly zero, but, they have to move pretty quickly, too. So what do you think about the response of the Trump campaign and Trump supporters so far?
Oh, so no, like I said before, it absolutely caught flat-footed, and predictably caught flat-footed because I predicted it. That there was this sense, I think, that the Trump campaign thought that when Biden stepped down, there would be a couple weeks of shuffling of back and forth of who's going to be the nominee of the so-called mini primary and all these things, right? That I think they thought they could count on sort of a couple weeks of disarray, and that this might not even be sorted out until the convention. But, in a matter of fact, Biden says he's dropping out of the race on Sunday, and Harris was essentially the nominee by Wednesday. And the Trump campaign just wasn't prepared for that. So no, the response has been abysmal. I think they will likely find their footing, and I think this lead will be subject to other things. When, for example, in Michigan, Madam Vice President, do you or do you not support an arms embargo to Israel? That'd be a big question to ask. So no, I think that the Trump campaign's done a not great job at it. I've seen a couple recent ads that have just been unveiled that I do think are effective, will be effective. And again, maybe it's just appealing to me and my nostalgia. But have you seen the Are You Better Off?
I haven't seen
Trump
that one.
ad.
No.
Oh, it's essentially it's just the Reagan voiceover ad from 1980, but with video of Harris and Biden, and yeah, it gave me chills, Mike. It was like, wow, it was a fantastic.
Did a shiver run down your leg? Is that how it goes, Jay?
It did, yeah. And the wonderful sort of thing is like there's no Trump in it, right? Or there's no Trump. The only time you hear Trump's voice is the end of the I approve this message.
That's probably for the best, because if you're trying to win over swing voters, maybe less of Donald Trump is actually more, I think, Yes,
and it's an absolute. It's an economic, ad. It's the, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And I think Reagan said it so much better than Trump did or could. So I think that was effective. And I think there's going to be more of those type ads that are going to come out, and as they sort of find their footing, so to speak. But no, there was a couple. Oh, there's also the ones of Harris telling everyone the border's secure and then chuckling away and those kind of things. And I think those are going to be helpful too. So no, I think again, the Trump campaign blew a couple weeks here. So, and
in thinking about how the Trump campaign might want to run, I think at least if Donald Trump's press conference is any indication, you don't necessarily want Donald Trump just kind of freewheeling it, freelancer, right? I mean, that press conference was wow. Maybe he lies like that all the time, but I mean, no one was killed on January 6th, and I thought the MAGA people say Ashley Babbitt. What about Ashley Babbitt? Or
I mean,
or I love this one. His crowd,
yeah.
His crowd on January 6th was bigger than Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" crowd, when it's like 10,000 versus 250,000. Or, the New York cases were totally controlled by the Department of Justice, right? I mean, the Letitia James civil case, the Alvin Bragg criminal case, just wow. The way that got.
Well, I think there may be some looking into the number 3 person at the Department of Justice left the Department of Justice to go help Alvin Bragg.
Totally controlled out of the Department of Justice. That's the quote.
Yeah.
That is wrong. Would you not agree?
I would say we don't know.
Wait a second.
To say anything controlled is maybe a stretch.
Yeah. But you think, yeah.
But
how about this? Well, you at least go ahead.
Do you think? Well, I won't get into it. But to say that there is no connection, I think would understate the matter.
I think you're assuming a lot of collusion and bad faith on the part of Democrats, as is perhaps your.
No. I don't think you need collusion or bad faith. Again, it's sort of.
But no, let's be clear about what Donald Trump is saying.
If everyone shows up at Heinz Field with their terrible towels, it doesn't indicate a conspiracy.
Yeah, but you're making Donald Trump's argument something that it's not, and don't do that. I mean, come on. He's saying that what he is saying is that Biden and the liberals in the federal Department of Justice they ran these prosecutions against him. They controlled these, and that is just false. And I'm asking.
I would say, Fred, that there's no evidence that they ran or controlled those prosecutions.
And I hope you're willing to admit that, yes, his January 6th crowd was not the same size or larger than MLK's crowd.
It was not.
Okay. So.
You got him there.
Or, or things.
But let's put it this way. What do you think if Alvin Bragg had received a call from the White House or Merrick Garland and said, Alvin, I don't know about this. I don't think this is going to be helpful. This is a real stretch legally. No one's ever been convicted of this the way you're trying to convict them. We just don't think this is a great case. But use your own judgment.
I know you enjoy.
You think he would have gone forward?
I know you enjoy this argumentation tactic, this sort of hypothetical, where in which we will assume that the Democrats will do the least principled thing. And I'm not going to bite on that because there's no way we can know. It's just as possible that Alvin Bragg could say, go ahead and pound salt. He's a criminal and I'm going to convict him. And maybe I'll make my political bones doing that. We don't know. But
no, but I'm trying to point out the way politics often works.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but that is not what Donald Trump is saying. Just what I'm trying to argue here is
I'm setting aside. Let's concede. I agree that it's not controlled by the White House or Department of Justice.
Yeah. But my larger point is that it once again hit me the way in which politicians lie, but Donald Trump lies with a speed and a size and just a breathtaking ballsiness that it's just wow. The stuff he said, and that's not just the lies. He sounded more than a little bit incoherent at times as well. He gave this answer about, he was asked whether the FDA he direct the FDA to revoke access to mifepristone. And he said this weird rambling kind of thing about letting the people vote or something and humane options. And it was just this word salad sort of thing where if Joe Biden had said it, everyone on the right would be saying, see, look at that senile old man. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not going to go to the next, as far as we'll see as, the campaign goes on. Or there are some great quotes of Vice Presidential candidate Walz talking about, this is back in, I believe, July or August, about how, Vice President or how President Biden is the sharpest guy he's ever met, et cetera. So
there are lies. There are statements that are a matter of interpretation, and you can say, oh, come on. Could any reasonable person believe that? And then there are just like bald-faced, totally, absolutely
bald-faced liar.
Yes. Incontrovertibly lies. There is no possible way that Donald Trump could have thought that his crowd was larger than MLK's crowd, or there's no possible way he could have actually thought that if he were president, there would have been totally no inflation at all. Those are things that are just
I would say the second category that seems to fall into political puffery, right? Yeah, and I think that sort of falls under the kind of Joe Isuzu kind of I get that the idea that the crowd is bigger than Trump has a weird history of making up numbers on crowd sizes, which to me doesn't particularly matter one way or the other. My only point is consider President Biden's apparent condition over the last couple of years and the apologists he's had for that, who likely may have known more than they let on.
I guess I'm unclear as to how that relates to what Donald Trump is saying or doing. Well, is this just like a whataboutism argument?
If Donald Trump says my crowd was bigger than MLK's, you might say, yes, that's a lie, that's a falsehood. So what? Shame on you, Donald. If you have a lot of people who are saying the president is not suffering from any cognitive decline.
Gotcha.
To me, that's kind of a more important thing that the American people aren't finding out about. And we're also telling people the president is not suffering from any cognitive decline, and he's running again.
Got it. I got it. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Would all of that have been better to have known?
Yeah, it's a whataboutism argument.
Primaries.
I
better to have known that back in January.
Yeah.
As opposed to
you're saying what Trump is doing is okay because what Democrats do is worth. It's like I said, a whataboutism argument. I would argue.
I'm not saying it's okay. I am saying that the one lie is more significant than the other.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that, and that's why I think a lot of folks in the Democratic Party have pretty clearly upset about the Biden folks, the inner circle, for doing that sort of thing. So no question, that is a very consequential mischaracterization lie of Joe Biden's condition. Absolutely, I agree 100% on that. Also one of the things that came out in this last week is after he initially said he wouldn't debate Kamala Harris on ABC, Donald Trump reversed course, and then he agreed not only to that September 10th, I believe it is, debate, but 2 others as well. And I guess I'm wondering, Jay, what's your sense of how meaningful these debates might be? I assume, and I think it's a fairly safe assumption, that Harris will do better than Biden did, right? But what do you think about these upcoming debates?
Oh, I think they will be important, right? If you are, let's go back to if you're being, the Harris campaign is being strategic by not talking to the press at this point, you've got that, that's sort of a fail-safe, right? Of that there are going to be some unscripted moments in these debates. So I think they are going to be big. I think a lot of people will tune in, especially usually people tuned out of debates, right? Because it was just sort of each side shouted talking points at one another. But then the last one, wow, that was something. So the next one might be something as well. So I do think they will be significant and will have an impact. Will 3 of them have an impact? I don't know.
Yeah, I tend to think like with all debates, for the most part, they won't do a whole lot. But given the fact that how close the election is likely to be, that could make a critical difference to at least a small group of folks, and especially that first debate, which will be the first time that a lot of Americans will be able to see Kamala Harris going to go up against Donald Trump there. But in terms of actually learning anything, again, I think debates are fairly useless. There's a part of me, but I'd love this. I was thinking about debates when this came up, and I would love to see something like, I don't know, maybe like candidate conversations, where sort of you just have the candidates talking to each other. I know that's just not possible, and it probably would descend into, especially with Donald Trump, into kind of craziness. But what I hate about debates is they're basically a way of just attacking the other person indirectly through a third party, right? The moderator. And I found that it seems to me that it's a lot harder to be just an awful person when you're talking directly to somebody, as opposed to talking through somebody, or
I think you maybe underestimate some of the people involved.
Oh no,
they could really be terrible people talking directly to each other.
But I don't know. I think it would be. I think it would be an interesting format. It would never happen, right? Because it'd just be too different, that sort of thing. But I don't know. I'd like to see candidate conversations, I think. So, but yeah, I don't see that's going to happen. So.
Well, as what I mean. Again, I'm always a fan of sort of the Bill Buckley firing line type format.
Yeah.
Right. The sort of the long form interview discussion debate type thing.
Yeah, the kind of thing.
But I don't know that that's ever worked for candidates, right? I mean, I think that's worked for people arguing over issues and candidate proxies maybe. But the candidates themselves, part of the debate is it's not even just because here's the thing: you could always like read just a policy paper, right, by each one, and I suppose that would, if you're looking for hey, what's their position on X. You could discover that, but if you're looking for these intangibles of leadership and inspiration and those kind of things, right, that aren't going to come across on paper, I think that's one of the reasons we have what we have now with debates, and there's so much stage management that goes into it. And I mean, if you remember, like the Gore Bush debates that Gore hired. Oh gosh, who is the feminist author?
Yeah, Naomi, one of the Naomis. I get them confused. A lot of people do apparently. But yeah, shouldn't wear a brown suit. It wasn't masculine enough or something like that.
At the beginning, like walk over and invade Bush's space and sort of mark his territory and all this sort of thing to establish himself as the alpha male.
Or how Donald Trump always wears the big red ties that are super long to kind of, make up for certain whatever. Anyway, small hands, or I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah. But so anyway, what my point is that part of it, as far as candidates go, I think has always been with us.
Yeah. Because that's a lot easier for voters.
And I don't know that you can get away from it. And because look, we don't just pick candidates based on here is your, here's where they are. Here's the policy white paper. Vote on this. You do based on that, for lack of a better word, charisma, leadership, inspiration, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think also just most people just aren't in a position to really, some of these issues are pretty difficult to understand and complex. And so it's sort of hard. It's a lot easier to say, well, that guy just seems like a jerk, or I really like the way, she answered that question or gave it, that sort of, I think it's just so much easier for people to do.
Well, here's the other thing that you get though, and that you don't get from policy papers is it's one thing to have, here's my position. The other question is that really your position? Do you really believe that? Right. So I think debates, you get some sort of idea of credibility, trustworthiness.
See, that's why I think
lack thereof, right?
That's why I think some sort of a format that was more where at least it gave candidates an opportunity to somehow directly engage, maybe to ask each other questions, might be even more useful. Because if I hear my opponent say something about a policy position and I think, well, wait a second, this seems to me to be false and not in line with what that person, I can not only demonstrate that I understand the policy background and my opponent's previous positions and actions. But you see what I mean? I think it can be a much richer kind of format and give voters more information than if you just have a moderator doing it. And also, that would remove the charge, especially here from Donald Trump, is that, oh my God, the moderators are awful, how nasty they were to me and that sort of thing. And if it's the other candidate, well, that removes that whole thing from the equation.
Yeah. I don't think he complained about the moderators last.
No, not last time. No. I think that the Trump rules, if he wins, everything went just fine. But if anything happens that is seen as bad, well, as far as I can tell, the only two perfect people in the history of, the civilization are, I guess, Jesus Christ and Donald Trump, as far as I can tell, having never erred in any way would be my sense of Donald Trump. I don't know. So there you go. If that's not a recommendation, I don't know what is, But so anyway, any other thoughts on the debates?
No, not really. I again look forward to watching them because I think that is going to be perhaps the first glimpse of the real Kamala Harris.
Yeah. And so moving back to the campaign, so right now it seems like Harris has a lot of momentum. One would expect in a couple weeks after the Democratic convention that she might get a little bit more of a bump. And so how do you sort of see this? Certainly 3 weeks ago, I was thinking, hey, the odds are very good that Donald Trump will be the next president. Now, I guess I'll say I feel sort of cautiously optimistic. I look at the map and I look at I feel like there's maybe a pretty much even odds that Harris gets to 270 or more. And I want to get your take on that.
So I think you're basing it on a couple assumptions. One would be that the Trump campaign continues to do nothing, which I don't think is going to be the case. And the other is that Harris will be able to avoid any serious questions for the remainder of the campaign, which is possible. Although it's that's why we have the debates. But no, I think the race still favors Trump, and people are going to say, "What? What are you, crazy?" And I'll go back to fundamentals in these swing states on things like the issues where Trump leads on the economy, on immigration, et cetera. I think he's going to be the stronger candidate there. I think you're going to see, again, you've got a burst of enthusiasm now, and we'll see if it holds, especially if Kamala Harris has to answer more difficult questions at some point.
And I would argue that the Trump campaign has not been doing nothing. Just what they've been doing has not been particularly effective, attacking childless cat ladies and other things like that. I mean, they've been doing things, but they haven't been doing things that have helped them a whole lot at this point.
Yeah.
And so it's different from
like you said, they were
nothing.
sort of caught flat-footed and didn't really respond with the strategy, just kind of flailed a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and I think I agree that things are going to be, and maybe you would agree as well, that things are going to be very tight in the end. No one's going to run away with this one, is my sense.
I don't think it's going to be as close as you think it's going to be.
I see. So you think that Donald Trump's going to get maybe a 300-plus electoral vote win, basically?
I think it's possible. Yeah.
Possible. Okay. That's fair. You're going to hedge your bets a little bit like that. But I mean, I just don't see how Donald Trump is going to have any kind of a big win or anything like that. I think, again, to me, the clearest path, say, for Harris is under 290 electoral votes. And I think the same is probably true for Trump. I don't see anyone kind of dominating this race. But you think there's a possibility.
Do you remember, Mike, gosh, ages ago, there was a time when the argument was we need to have Joe Biden as the nominee because Kamala Harris is too weak electorally to win.
Yeah, and she certainly, but again, I think that I agree. And she wouldn't have been my first choice or my second choice or my third choice, maybe my fifth choice. I don't know. But again, she's going up against Donald Trump, who is incredibly weak. He's a guy who has a ceiling of support that is almost certainly below 50%. He's no Ronald Reagan, right? He's no Bill Clinton. He's not somebody who can bring big majorities. And so when you're running against an historically weak candidate, if you're pretty weak yourself, that's less of a problem than if you were running against, say, a Reagan.
But again, these were decisions where they were matching her up against Trump, right? This was in the context of,
well, yeah, I don't think she's the best matchup
Biden
at all.
run again? And the idea was, my God, certainly Kamala Harris can't beat Trump. Biden's the only one who can beat Trump.
Well, that was Joe and Jill who were saying that.
Conventional wisdom a month ago.
No, that was not. No, that was not at all conventional wisdom a month ago. There were some Biden stalwarts who were saying that sort of thing a month ago. But by that point, it was pretty clear to most Democrats that the idea that only Biden could beat Trump was just ridiculous.
Let me say maybe I've just got my dates wrong. Maybe more than a month ago. Let's say, but pre-debate.
Pre-debate, I think
seemed to be the sort of the conventional wisdom.
No, so I don't.
6 weeks ago.
I certainly wasn't my conventional wisdom. I mean, I certainly think that from before that Biden was a weak candidate, just, simply the fact that he's incredibly unpopular, right? I mean, so, yeah.
Right.
But maybe.
But again, polls typically showed Harris as being even just as unpopular or even more so in some cases.
Right. But then, of course, Biden became even more unpopular. And so, yeah. And so I made the argument, I think, a few weeks ago on the show that I felt like Harris was the worst possible choice except for Biden of the top contenders. But, there you go. So
was there, and let me throw this out there, and this is maybe, I don't know, it's conspiratorial thinking, but was there a sense in the media Democratic establishment that they almost had to downplay any Kamala Harris competency in order to preserve Biden's primacy?
I don't think so. I think it was more a case, and I don't even think it was a question of competency. I think the argument was that she ran a poor campaign in 2000, right? And it kind of flamed out. And there were some personnel issues and some strategic questions. And so I think it was much less a question about her ability to govern potentially as her ability to actually win an election. And those are two, of course, as you know, two very different skill sets.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, but all right. Any other thoughts on the race?
No, that's all I got.
Okay. Well, that seems like a good place to close. And so if there was, I should mention that there's a bunch of things we didn't get to that we will get to in the midweek show, like the Google antitrust ruling, another primary loss for a squad member. I wanted to talk about those Biden Supreme Court reforms, a bunch of other things as well, and that will be on the midweek show. So we hope you will check that out. And if you are a supporter, of course, you'll get the full thing. If you're not, you'll get that little snippet preview kind of thing. And if there is anything on this show that you heard, you thought, oh, come on, you want to either agree, disagree, what have you, let us know. You can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com, through Facebook, through X. Links are always in the show notes. There's also our Discord forum for supporters. I'm on that all the time. So, yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And, of course, if you're not a supporter and you can become a supporter, that would be super helpful. And, again, we always have those links in the show notes. But if you want to get that full midweek show and you're not in the position to financially support us, send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get that set up for you. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help us out if you subscribe, rate us, and review us on your podcast app, as well as sharing episodes on social media. And before we go, as always, I want to have a special thanks to our wonderful executive producers. They are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,